In the past few weeks, we've seen Baldur's Gate 3 shatter sales expectations and player counts alike. I doubt I'm the only one out there that's completely shocked that a traditional turn-based computer RPG with a focus on single-player story building could smash its way up to the top 10 of the Steam charts, and all without a single season pass or microtransaction in sight.
Coincidentally enough, traditional CRPGs are one of our favorite types of games, and we couldn't be more excited about finally getting a sequel to Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, a long-standing pair of cherished classics that haven't seen any real follow-up since, seriously. We've gotten really well-received sequels or remakes for celebrated franchises like Diablo, System Shock, Resident Evil, Jagged Alliance, and now Baldur's Gate, all in the same year?
Over the next happy half hour or so, we're going to ponder our crystal balls to search out the game's magical high points as well as determine just where it gets lost in the Underdark. We'll also try to deconstruct the arcane formula that led up to the game's triumphant launch. So strap on your short sword and buckle your bracers as we guide you on this epic journey through Faerun. My name is Boss Sauce.
And I'm Roland Coons. And together, we are the two-headed hero. Let's turn the page of this musty tome back a few chapters to begin the history lesson.
Baldur's Gate 3 was developed under the practiced eye of Larian Studios, a small but long-lived development house based out of Belgium. Many of you out there might be saying, Larian who? And what's Belgium? But this team is made up of masters of the RPG craft. PC gamers in particular might remember their award-winning Divinity series, a series of isometric fantasy action RPGs before branching out into spin-offs like Dragon Commander, which somehow fused together real-time strategy with RPG and dragonflight simulation, or the phenomenal original Sin games, which were expansive, deep, turn-based tactical adventures.
Over the years, Larian games were praised for their complex systems, attention to detail, and cheeky humor, which gave their fantasy setting a flavor closer to Terry Pratchett than Tolkien. In fact, Rhianna Pratchett, daughter of the esteemed fantasy author, actually penned the plot of the second game in the series,
Beyond Divinity. This success, albeit in a niche audience, allowed Larian to build a reputation of trust large enough to partially crowdfund the development of Divinity Original Sin way back in 2013. This would prove to be their most ambitious project yet, a massive love letter to old-school, turn-based CRPGs that fully incorporated a unique approach to co-op, which allowed two players to explore huge maps, get into battles together or separately, and even talk with NPCs independently, with story decisions being settled by sort of a rock-paper-scissors tug of war. The future of the studio fully depended on the success of DOS, and thankfully, this became Larian's fastest-selling game when it finally launched in 2014.
This success pushed Larian to shoot for the heavens with the sequel, adding 4-player co-op and a staggering amount of replayability. Divinity Original Sin 2 would prove to be a smash hit for RPG fans, sweeping critical awards. This game is considered to be a masterpiece of the genre, and it was also a great example of early access done right, featuring regular updates and excellent fan communication. A pattern of behavior they would bring back full circle for the development of Baldur's Gate 3. Take a look at this gameplay. Anything seem familiar? Yeah, that's right. The bones of Baldur's Gate 3 already existed nearly a decade ago.
At E3 2019, Larian announced that they had landed the coveted Dungeons & Dragons license and were given the green light to make Baldur's Gate 3. Hey, remember E3? Anyone even kinda miss it? No? Maybe? Anyway, when I heard about this, I was more excited than a bugbear in a butcher shop.
I was more excited than a bugbear in an ogre hole.
With such a great pedigree for RPGs, they were the perfect choice to bring Baldur's Gate into a new generation of gamers. And to fully understand the impact Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 had on the entire landscape of video games to come, we have to blow the dust off the big book of 90s gaming.
You see, Baldur's Gate was one of the first games to ever come out of BioWare. Yes, that BioWare.
I am the very model of a scientist Larian. I've studied species Turian, Asari, and Batarian.
A long time ago, before being relegated to EA's Gulag, BioWare were makers of some of the best licensed games to ever grace a screen. These included bangers like Neverwinter Nights and Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, and 1998's Baldur's Gate was their genesis, a D&D licensed role-playing game that stayed fairly faithful to the complex tabletop rule set. It introduced active pause combat, a twist on turn-based combat that seems archaic now, but was groundbreaking for the time. It made use of a proprietary engine, Infinity, that formed the foundation of several other brilliant RPGs. And it allowed up to 6 people to experience its journey across the rich realm of the Sword Coast.
Many a mom's basement had some Baldur's Gates. Baldur's Gate and its even more cherished follow-up, Baldur's Gate 2, were also BioWare's first attempt at their Choices Matter TM design philosophy. Your journey would change, sometimes dramatically, based on choices you make and the alignment of your character. It's safe to say that the influence of Baldur's Gate and its sequel still resonate even decades later. So Baldur's Gate 3, and by extension, Larian Studios, had some pretty big sabatons to fill.
Baldur's Gate 3 isn't just a game, it's a whole undertaking. In the interest of full disclosure, I have not totally completed the game yet, since it is absolutely massive, and there's a ton to see and do in the land of Faerun.
Here's my playtime as of this review. You can consider this a review in progress if you wish, but there's definitely enough gameplay and footage behind our belts to sing the game's praises and lament its flaws. There's going to be a few light spoilers ahead for the game's first couple hours, so consider this a warning.
As you click the New Game button, your blurry vision reveals a bleak alien prison, Geiger-esque, and a menacing toothy worm gets shoved into your eyeball by one of Lovecraft's dream girls. Words echo in your very thoughts as a raspy voice asks, "Who are you?"
This involuntary surgery serves as a clever introduction to the character generator. You can pick through one of the pre-mades, of course. They're all pretty compelling choices, and one of them, the Dark Urge, offers up an entirely different storyline, but we all know that the true CRPG aficionado is never going to be satisfied until they can roll their own. There's an extensive list of fantasy races, character classes, and backgrounds, enough to satisfy any hardcore tabletop enthusiast. Characters are fully modeled, and I mean fully, down to the Netherlands. You'll also be making a Guardian, which comes into play much later in the story.
While the cosmetics are varied enough, I was a little disappointed in the lack of variety in body types and faces. Everyone looks kinda stringy and there's barely a body hair in sight, but there's still plenty of tools to make your avatar look like a murder hobo worthy of any D&D table, or a meat man. Once the game gets workshop support, I suspect this won't be an issue as people mod in their own favorite anime characters and, I don't know, Drizzt Do'Urden, I suppose. Just let me be a goblin.
How you doing?
After you're fully satisfied with your brand new adventure clown, the scene cuts to Squidward making his way to the controls of some strange device. Light floods into the scene and we see the flying tentacle ship soaring over a great city, scooping up unlucky villagers left and right and eliciting Wilhelm screams. A portal bursts open and red dragons spill forth, tearing into the ship and blasting it with flames. A thrilling chase ensues, a blast of flames critically damages the guts of the flying octopus, freeing the prisoners from their bony chambers and giving you just enough time to ask yourself, what the fuck just happened? But you don't have time! The ship is burning all around you and a bunch of demons are swooping in from another dimensional gate to finish it and you off.
The first order of business is to take off all of your clothes, obviously. But then, you want to try to keep the weird squid ship from crashing. You'll need some help, so the next step is to look for some survivors and try to save them. Or not. You can take a few moments here to check out the wealth of base abilities available to your character and mess around with some of the actions like jumping, sneaking, or throwing before exiting this friendly sphincter.
A short jog around the pods puts you face to Cerebellum with a friendly brain with legs and introduces you to skill checks. These work just as you would expect. A 20-sided dice roll against a relevant character stat with any bonuses prominently displayed and applied. You can reroll a failed throw by using a point of inspiration, which is a holdover from the 5e rule set.
My main takeaway from playing through Baldur's Gate 3 so far is that the D&D 5th edition rule set is not only well represented here, it's actually represented better than the core 5th edition rule set in a lot of ways. Just being able to have all of your bonuses and possible bonuses in one place when you're trying to roll a skill check is huge. Earning inspiration is basically done by hitting little achievements. Each character can bank 4 points of inspiration at a time, and the game passes these around like hits off a halfling's hookah. Losing a skill check is often just as interesting as passing one, and I guess the only minor complaint I have here is that it's too easy to rack up a bunch of inspiration points and kind of brute force your way through.
After teaming up with your little brain with legs buddy and maybe a couple mysterious strangers, you'll be fighting your way to the helm. Combat in BG3 is a strategic turn-based affair and plays out really similarly to an actual 5e tabletop encounter, with a few liberties being taken to make the experience more video gamey.
D&D rules and mechanics can be overwhelming enough for veterans, and I've heard some concerns about the game's complexity echoed by first-time Baldur's Gate players that have never seen the inside of a monster manual before. Newcomers shouldn't worry too much. My advice, take your time, carefully read the tooltips and descriptions, and remember that experimenting and making mistakes is all part of the magic. The sheer amount of options in a fight can feel staggering at first, and they only get more complex as your party gains experience. You'll still need to make clever use of every tool though, since the fights can get pretty challenging. I would also suggest for a newcomer that wants things a little bit simplified to try out using a controller first.
Many of the encounters throughout the game take place within intricate areas, all with different access points, sightlines, and varying levels of verticality to take advantage of. Positioning counts for a lot. Knocking creatures off of a cliff or a chasm can take care of them in a single push, which is incredibly funny when it happens to them, but not so funny when it happens to you.
Other parts of the environment need to be carefully considered as well, since an unlucky firebolt heading into an oil slick can change the tide of a fight in an instant.
Cities will be razed to the ground, and they'll know she is absolute!
This level of interactivity extends pretty far. Liquids can become electrified, frozen into slippery surfaces, or turned into thick steam. Poison clouds can explode into fireballs, and props or traps can be triggered with a simple, well-placed arrow. If things go really bad, you can always resort to running, or save scumming. But even then, you need to be careful where you're running to, since a surprise encounter can jump out from any corner.
A couple things do hold the combat back from true greatness, and most of it has to do with the camera, which will sometimes just decide to do some space travel for no good reason. There's no way to strip back vertical layers like in the recently released Jagged Alliance 3, which makes navigation a little tougher, and stuff like tiny switches or panels in the environments become hard to find. The camera issues compound with the fact that it's easy to misclick the landscape and miss targets completely when aiming your attacks. These aren't massive problems and are likely to be patched out by the time this video drops, but it's still mildly frustrating that these problems carry over from Larian's last game, DOS 2.
The game's encounter difficulty feels well measured, and areas are level gated to a point, but clever players can sometimes find ways to deal with particularly dangerous encounters by using stealth, hazard barrels, and positioning to their greatest advantage. Clutch victories and lucky rolls provide nearly the same satisfaction that you'd have from sitting around a table and rolling a bunch of dice, pushing Cheetos through your cheeks. But when an attempt at punching above your character level goes wrong, you'll have to fall back on a prior save. And this is one area where Baldur's Gate 3 could use a little bit of work.
You can save at any time. You can save at any time. You can save at any time. Even during a fight, which opens the door for the good old-fashioned
Save scum!
But the game's autosave is really inconsistent. I had multiple instances of losing 30+ minutes of progress, due to the fact that autosave only kicks in when it feels like it and isn't taking a coffee break. So be safe, friends. Slap that F5 button like it owes you money.
But we're not really here to talk about that. We're here to talk about a giant cephalopod crashing towards the ground at an alarming speed. Through another sphincter we go, rushing towards the flight controls, only to witness the clash between a big scary devil man and another calamari kid. Tentacle Face, mistaking you for one of their brainless thralls, frantically begs you to grab a hold of the Avatar top knots that control the ship and keep everyone from crashing all the way to death. Just crashing straight to death.
As your helpless character gets sucked out the window and falls towards certain death, they are miraculously saved by a mysterious purple power that defies the laws of physics and stops them from becoming a red stain on the beach. You wake up on the shores of the Emerald Grove with a head full of questions and worms. But there's no time for that. You gotta scoop yourself up, slap on the nearest stupid hat you can find, and try to get some help, because
The tadpole is a death sentence, and the clock is ticking. You need a cure.
thus began my journey as Gorga Cheesemangler, Mushroom Druid at Lar.
And mine as Slippery Lips, Renowned Meat Man. Fortunately, help is just a short stumble away. Depending on who you saved in the crash, you'll soon be filling up your little circus with like-minded survivors that all have the same headworm problems that you do. Within coughing distance of your landing zone, you'll stumble across colorful characters like Amnesia Priest, Boulder Wizard, Mean Lizard Lady in a Cage, and Fabulous Pansexual Vampire. Honestly, all of the side characters are pretty interesting and useful, and it's really hard to narrow it down to just 3 to take along on your adventures.
Good thing you don't really have to. The handy camp feature allows you to teleport right into your little ring of circus tents from nearly anywhere in the realm and swap out party members, rummage through your trash, and rest up for a whole new day of adventuring. There's even an ally you can unlock early on that unlocks a bunch of important features, like character respec, hiring custom underlings, and resurrecting dead companions. The camp is really well thought out. It reminds me a lot of similar camps from Dragon Age or like the airship in Final Fantasy VII. It's a cozy, easily accessible, self-contained location that has both narrative and mechanical functions, and its layout and theme changes depending on the environment, so it even looks neat. There's also a dog, and you can talk to the dog, and pet the dog, and play fetch with the dog, and summon the dog to help you find treasures, like a little dog treasure hunter while you're exploring. And wow, yes, this was definitely an addition to get internet karma that completely won me over.
There are some drawbacks to the camp, of course. Taking a long rest requires food supplies which have to be collected in advance. It also takes time, and the passage of time has a meaningful effect on story progress. Pushing the clock forward with a long rest can cause important quests to advance or even fail altogether. This can make the plot pacing feel a little bit off, with some sections being long stretches of exploring and then a huge exposition dump once you make camp. Since you've got a ticking time bomb in your head in the form of a hungry little caterpillar, the best practice is to carefully ration your spell slots and resources, only taking a long rest when you absolutely need to.
Camping also allows you to see a different side of your companions. You can watch them relaxing in their jammies and passing the time before bed, reading, drinking, or Shadowheart playing with her, box. You can also have some heart-to-hearts with your followers to get to know them better, which can take some unexpected turns.
I will come to your bunk and take what is mine. Until that night comes, I shall keep enjoying your scent.
This game is every bit as horny as actual tabletop D&D.
And mind the goblin traps, unless you relish a spit roasting.
I mentioned before that the companions all feel fleshed out and interesting. And this is a true.
This is a true.
And this is a true. Especially since each one has different reactions to the environments and situations you'll find throughout the Sword Coast. You can increase or reduce your rapport with party members based on your interactions and choices. It actually becomes pretty tough to choose between them. Do I bring Big Red Waifu because she's big and strong and literally burning with excitement? Or do I take the amnesiac Shadow Priest who can blow up skeletons with the power of God's love? Of course you'll need to take the catty vampire along, not only for his excellent banter, but for unlocking doors and picking pockets. And there's a lot to loot in the land of Faerun.
Baldur's Gate 3 subscribes to the Skyrim philosophy of loot distribution. There's tons of candles, food, dinnerware, just stuff laying around. Sure, this feels more immersive in some ways, and a lot of this stuff has a use, but managing and organizing these piles of junk can take a lot of time all by itself. Look at this organizational nightmare. You can put this off temporarily by sending pretty much any lootable object straight to your camp stash, but this only delays the inevitable. Filters help a little bit, but inventory management is kind of a pain. And while I love how many slots you have on the little paper doll, it becomes a hassle to optimize your gear once you start picking up all the fistfuls of treasure and magical trinkets that the game throws your way. It would also be really nice to see what the characters outside of your party are lugging around without having to play musical chairs with your squad lineup, and I think that if you could at least name or color code the containers, it might go a long way to making this whole process easier.
This inventory mess problem, it is definitely worth noting, is what made me give up on a very lengthy run of Divinity Original Sin 2. I one day opened it up and I was like, wow, I have a completely full inventory and I'm only going to get to play this game further if I sort through all of this stuff. It would have been hours of work to sort through the stuff, you know? And so I just never went back to it.
If you're like a vampire that if someone drops a bag of rice in front of you, you have to count every single grain, this game might trigger you.
But let's look at the bright side. You're going to run into more loot than you can possibly steal, and thievery is now a somewhat challenging prospect. Victims of your crimes will look around and investigate when their pockets get lighter, or if a backpack suddenly walks off, and getting caught can get you thrown in a cell, or worse, into a grave. By the Gravedigger! There's no equivalent to the Skyrim bucket trick here, and I appreciate that doing crimes carries real consequences, because it feels way better when you do the crimes.
Exactly. I want satisfying crimes to do. I don't want no busto crimes.
It's really fun to pull off a heist, though.
Looting doesn't just take place within dirty villages or castle walls, though. Exploring is exquisite because areas are thoughtfully designed. There's tons of secret passages and alternate paths, and a striking amount of verticality allows you to sneak around danger or find tasty treasures throughout many of the game's environments. It's so cool that each map feels lovingly handcrafted, and it really makes the Sword Coast feel like an interesting place to spend time in, rather than a series of video game levels. And the attention to detail does not stop with the maps.
The visuals and audio in Baldur's Gate 3 are striking. Definitely a step above any of Larian's prior ambitions to date. In case you don't have a rig that can rival a Bitcoin farm, there's an absolutely overwhelming amount of graphic, audio, and gameplay tweaks available here. Tons of accessibility options like character highlights and double-click speed round all this out to make it as approachable as possible to any gamer that wants to get in on this deep, expansive fantasy setting.
The world of Faerun is alive with vibrant colors, deep blue waters, amazing set pieces, and extremely detailed character models. Character animations are top-notch, and seeing your party members blood splattered and dirty when talking to them after a rough fight is a nice touch, also reminiscent of Dragon Age. Not to say everything is perfect, there's a host of minor visual bugs, disappearing bodies, disappearing UIs, stalled animation during combat, visual glitches in cutscenes and the like, but this feels like small potatoes compared to several high-profile game launches we've seen over the last few years.
Yeah! Fuck!
And knowing Larian, these issues will probably crumble quickly under the mighty patch hammer. The amount of detail present on every pauldron and pommel is stunning and must have taken a massive amount of labor to complete. And this was obviously a labor of love.
Every cultist, drow, and dwarf is an actual character, with at least a little bit of banter to throw back and forth at you, bringing back memories of the greatest computer RPGs such as Knights of the Old Republic.
Young Kex here got a battlefield promotion when his predecessor got quartered by a beam splitter.
Sidebar, there are so many excellent goblins.
What's it bloody look like? We're teaching this here pipsqueak to fly.
Larian brags about the hundreds of thousands of voice lines present in the game, and I believe it. Thoughtful details like party member reactions are scattered everywhere. For example, Shadowheart has a line when you give her a statue of her rival god.
Maybe it can be repurposed somehow.
Is this necessary? Not really, but it's this close attention to detail that brings their stories to life.
Voice performances themselves are top-notch, and there's a pretty big variety of mocapped animations to go along with every conversation to keep them from feeling stiff and video gamey. You know, Oblivion syndrome.
Stop! You violated the law!
And on top of this, Larian has sprinkled a lot of their trademark humor all over the game.
Excellent vibes when I am doing obviously stupid shit in a dungeon, like pick up Scary Skullbook. My companions will react just as my tabletop companions in real life would.
Please don't open the Necronomicon.
Animation quality isn't limited to conversations alone, and Baldur's Gate 3 definitely delivers on making combat feel weighty, something that turn-based games often struggle with. Sound design pulls a lot of the weight here too, and equal attention was paid to make every arcane phrase or polearm strike cut through the mix.
And the music! Holy hell, the music is fantastic. The battle tracks are catchy and magnificent. Deep, twangy strings and spooky choirs resonate in your skull, sticking in your head like an illithid worm having lunch behind your eardrums. The work of Borislav Slavov is absolutely top-notch here, and gets to show off its range with a gorgeous bardic ballad.
On the stars tonight, smile and pain will fade away. Words of mine will turn to ash when you call the last light down.
Many of Baldur's Gate 3's largest strengths lie within its storytelling, but the writing and pacing also contain several of the game's missteps. Fair warning, spoilers for the first few hours of Act 1 lie ahead, so if you want to avoid the spoiler skeleton, go to here. When we last left the saga of Gorga Cheesemangler, she had just woken up on the beach after the fiery Nautiloid crash and gathered up a few like-minded misfits to try and find a way to deal with their unwanted passengers. These brainworms are powerful psychic entities known as illithid tadpoles and allow for a certain degree of mind control over less powerful entities as well as psychic connections to others carrying the worm. This makes other worm brains instantly identifiable when you meet them, but it can also put your squad in potentially vulnerable situations when a more powerful tadpole user tries to pry information out of your gray matter. Also, after a few days of painful incubation, the tadpole will transform the host into a brand new mind flayer. Not the ideal outcome for your little ragtag group. But this still isn't the whole picture. Picking through the wreckage of the squid ship, you'll find a lone Mind Flayer survivor. After a brief interrogation, it seems that the illithids actually thought they were working to save the people they abducted, and their motivations might not be as evil as they first seemed. Questions upon questions inside of even more questions start to take shape, and answers are in short supply. As your party scouts over the area, you'll uncover more clues that may lead to your salvation. The mean lizard woman from the Nautiloid claims a nearby Kraish, a Githyanki warrior clan, has a powerful device designed to remove the worm. There's rumors of a swamp hag that can work near-limitless miracles. A druid in a nearby grove is a powerful healer, rumored to have studied the illithid tadpoles and their effects. And a literal devil appears, whisking you away into some sort of vision of finery before overtly threatening you. Not far down the road from where you find Gale, the wizard in a boulder, you'll stumble into your first encounter with the Cult of the Absolute. Unlike your little group, the cultists seem to be fully indoctrinated to a higher power. A being called, well, the Absolute exerts a huge amount of psychic influence and aspires to godhood. The cultists are led by a trio of powerful leaders: a vicious goblin king, a cruel drow warrioress, and a very powerful goblin shaman, one of which may hold the solution to preventing your wormy demise. By the time you completed your journey from squid ship to ground, the cult had already started gathering forces in a nearby fort, hoping to snap up more unwilling recruits by slapping a big juicy brainworm in each of the inhabitants of a nearby druid grove. As luck would have it, the Emerald Grove is also flush with refugees from nearby Elturel, making it an even juicier target for the forces of the Absolute. And as luck would not have it, the head druid of the Emerald Grove is currently being tortured to death in the bowels of the Absolute's fortress after a quest to retrieve a long-lost artifact went horribly wrong. The Devil's words prove prophetic sooner rather than later, and your options for a cure slowly whittle down one by one until you have no further choice but to face the fortress. From here you have a couple options. Infiltrate the Cult of the Absolute as a double agent, basically passing off as a loyal follower to get closer to the cult's leadership, or going full send and wiping as many filthy worm lovers off the face of Faerun as you can until they cough up a cure for your condition. You can even combine these two approaches with a combination of clever choices and lucky dice rolls. The crisis comes to a head once the Cult of the Absolute decides to finally move against the Emerald Grove, and your loyalties will face the ultimate test. Whatever the outcome of this massive battle, you learn shortly after that the only remaining possibility is to travel westward through the shadow-cursed lands, towards the ancient and mysterious Moonrise Towers, in order to confront the Absolute at its source and eradicate the brainworms before they turn you and your friends into the Squidbillies. Of course, this is only a small fraction of the densely packed content that players can experience throughout Baldur's Gate 3, and it is largely excellent, but there are a couple minor issues with the writing all the same. The Illithid infection provides really good motivation for the player, making the story a race against time with survival as the goal. This is an interesting twist on the tired old ticking bomb trope, a cliche which can be found all over cyberpunk, or high-octane thrillers like the Jason Statham magnum opus, Crank. It's cool to see this cliche repurposed into something fresh by adding it into a fantasy setting and giving the extra creepy factor that the Mind Flayers bring to the table. Next, the not so good. Don't get me wrong, I truly love all the characters, but half of your squad has some additional pre-existing ticking bombs of their own. Karlach's infernal engine is literally consuming her with flames. Shadowheart has a recurring, worsening wound that accompanies her bouts of amnesia. Will is under a restrictive demon contract that could yank him back to hell at any time. Asterion is a goddamn vampire that needs to suck on the living to survive. And Gale is literally an arcane weapon of mass destruction with a lit fuse. Another minor problem lies with the story pacing. Due to how the passage of time is tied to taking long rests back at camp, the game tends to have long stretches of exposition every time you rest. If Baldur's Gate 3 didn't punish the player early and often for long resting too much, this might feel a little more even. There's also a few instances where a major story event or battle blindsides you with a tough fight right when you least expect it. Coupled with the lax autosave feature, this can mean losing a sizable chunk of progress. But overall, these are nitpicks. The quality of the writing and the voice acting shines. Quest lines can twist and change in unexpected ways depending on the survival or death of certain important characters. Most of the time, the storyline feels fresh and mysterious and engaging, with a good sprinkling of morally gray areas and uncertain choices presented around every turn.
Baldur's Gate 3 has 4-player cooperative multiplayer integrated through the entire experience. This is an awesome feature, and the amount of freedom each individual player has to explore on their own and rejoin battles or conversations as they wish, all willy-nilly, flopping around like a silly pickle boy, makes for a lot of potential fun. Here's us being two little naked freaks that dance around. You know, your basic D&D stuff. Still, it's far from a flawless experience.
While it's really cool to be able to experience the entire game with a little group of buddies, the co-op is markedly worse than in DOS 2. You can add a friend into your game at any time, but once they create their character or pick one of the pre-mades, that character is stuck in your party forever.
It's really puzzling that Larian would have such a glaring oversight in Baldur's Gate 3 when the prior title allows you to swap characters in and out of your party as you see fit.
With a few more tweaks, the multiplayer would be amazing, and we can only hope this gets patched up in one of the next major updates.
Before we finish up looking at the factors that made this game so successful, we'd like to take a second to say thanks for braving the journey with us while we navigate the Underdark of Baldur's Gate 3.
A lot of love and care goes into these videos, and we truly enjoy making them, so if you want to help us gather our party before venturing forth on our next epic tale, please consider subscribing to our Patreon page, becoming a channel member, or tossing a coin in our hat on Ko-Fi. You'll feel good, we'll feel good, and we'll all share a flagon of mead around the campfire.
If your adventuring fund is more rags than riches, make sure to ring that bell, subscribe, and share the video with your favorite strategy RPG fans so that we can cast True Strike on that old YouTube algorithm and roll up a big old beefy critical hit. You get what I'm saying? I'm being very subtle. I'm being very subtle on this.
Hi.
Speaking of critical hits, there's no denying that Larian has one on their hands right here. But a perfect storm of clever marketing moves, a smartly managed early access period, a legacy to fulfill, and a rise in overall interest for Dungeons & Dragons all contributed to its success.
Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 have enjoyed an immense cult following over the last couple decades, each selling over 3.5 million copies worldwide. Retrospectives and feature-length fan reviews are still popping up for these cherished favorites even today. This provides a huge potential fan base for a sequel, and along with Larian's built-in fan base from the stellar Divinity Original Sin series, expectations were brewing.
At the same time, the popularity of Dungeons & Dragons experienced a resurgence like never before, due in no small part to endorsements from celebrities, appearances in popular shows, and culminating in the feature film Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, which grossed over $200 million worldwide after its March 31st release. Honor Among Thieves and Baldur's Gate 3 actually have much in common. They weave epic tales while keeping in touch with the silliness and spontaneity that a tabletop session can hold, and having release dates within mere months of each other was a blessing for both.
And let's not forget about one tiny world-changing detail, a microscopic one really, but one that had a global impact nonetheless. COVID-19's emergence in early 2020 kept many people indoors and in small groups, and what better way to forget about the anxiety of wiping off your groceries than to transport your brains into vivid fantasy realms? The sudden popularity of video conferencing during the pandemic also led to an explosion of D&D campaigns being run over Discord or sites like Roll20. When Baldur's Gate 3, a co-op experience that simulates a D&D campaign, launched its early access run on October 6, 2020, it seemed like a natural fit, and had plenty of D&D fans ready to jump into another Sword Coast saga.
But even with all these external factors working in their favor, no small amount of credit goes to Larian themselves. After several successful titles, Larian mastered the art of early access with clear and frequent communication and steady updates, making Baldur's Gate 3 one of the most satisfying early access stories ever seen on Steam.
Positively divine.
Last but not least is the game itself. In its final form, Baldur's Gate 3 is a window back in time to when polished, high-quality AAA experiences came complete in-box without gating parts of the experience behind a bunch of microtransactions or tiresome battle passes.
I require good!
It provides a level of role-playing immersion and experimentation that few other games can reach, and if you can't toss dice around a table with some friends, this game is the next best thing.
While a few minor issues keep it from true perfection, we haven't seen a production like this applied to the tried and true CRPG formula in quite a long time. My greatest hope is that the success of Baldur's Gate 3 sends a clear message to other AAA developers, and that we'll see more games with this much depth, quality, and value in the years to come. We can't wait to jump right back in and discover more of what Faerun has to offer, and anyone with at least a passing interest in RPGs will likely feel the same way.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next Two-Headed Hero.
A hand? Anyone? Ow! Perhaps I should have clarified? A helping hand?